Okay, well, welcome everybody to this you're in the last leg of this conference, and apparently the weather has changed upstairs, so you're not missing anything. So you may as well be with us in this room. So thank you for joining us. I'm Jahani Hodgson. I'm Executive Director of the Global Fund for Community Foundations based in Johannesburg, and I'm going to be moderating this session. We have unfortunately, we get the shortest session on the agenda. We only have an hour, less than an hour, so we're going to try and be very efficient. So basically, I'm going to give you a few comments generally to sort of set the scene for what we're talking about in terms of community philanthropy. And then we're going to have a story from Thailand, from Sombat, about a citizen response, a voluntary outpouring of voluntarism that happened after a flood in Thailand recently. And then we're going to have some reflections from Amita on the context for community philanthropy in India. And then our final speaker is Mirza from the Aga Khan Foundation, who's going to talk about an initiative that the Aga Khan Foundation and Mott Foundation were involved in to look at the value of community philanthropy. And we'll be talking a little bit about this report, and there are plenty of copies to go around. So I should state for the record that I am not agnostic on this topic. I believe there is a value to community philanthropy. My organization is quite young. We've been legally established for only 3 years. And really a large part of what we've been doing over the last 5 years since we've been operational is to map the territory for community philanthropy. What are the institutions that are out there? What does community philanthropy look like? And we've made grants to around 140 so organizations in 50-ish countries around the world. And so we're starting to get a sense that there is a thriving and vibrant community philanthropy field around the world. I think the context, this has come up in the conference a lot, and maybe it's just that we flatter ourselves we're working in a time that really matters, but the context for community philanthropy is ripe right now. That we've been hearing about poverty, climate change, communities on the front lines and under a lot of pressure. There's people moving, and communities are the ones that sort of absorb some of these initial hits to them. Also, in the context of the conference theme around renegotiating the social contract, we're seeing governments and civil society and private sectors starting to renegotiate their spaces as governments often retreating, international aid flows are diminishing. The rise in social media, which we sort of heard a lot about, and I think has been extremely important for consolidating the sense of identity of a community philanthropy field, which has, up until quite recently, been quite disparate and quite scattered. And I would say also just the sort of ongoing search for models for effective development. Philanthropy and development aid can often be quite blunt instruments to deal with some of the nuanced elements of development, of changing mindsets, of empowering people, of the intangible sides of things, and how can community philanthropy really be more of a sensitive tool for bringing about some of these objectives. And also, in addition to that, we know that all around the world there are traditions of philanthropy, of giving, of mutual self-help, and that often these get overlooked as a force for development. They're acknowledged, but they're not really brought into the development discourse. So the group that we work with in terms of our constituency is a group of organizations that they include community foundations, women's funds, community foundation-like organizations, hybrids, and the things that they have in common, despite their enormous diversity, I would say are around the role of local assets. Whatever they are, whether it's financial or human, but really also in the context of building a culture of local philanthropy. And this is quite distinct from many NGOs and other civil society organizations. They also, many of them, use small grants to deliver these objectives. And I think, for me, one of the distinctions of this field is the emphasis on local institutions, that you're building capacities of civil society. It's not just about grants to individuals, although that's part of it. It's really about building infrastructure. And so some of the organizations we work with, just briefly before I hand over to Sombat, in terms of the sort of the size and scale and breadth of organizations, range from startups. We're involved in a community foundation initiative in Haiti right now, which is being set up by a kind of multi-stakeholder group who are feeling some of that frustration about you know, 2 years after the earthquake and an awful lot of money going into Haiti, why are Haitian organizations not there? Their capacities aren't being built. What are the assets and resources that exist in Haiti, whether it's from the wealthy or at the community level? We've done some work with the Community Foundation in Ghana, which actually is being set up by a mining company. It's a sort of, we did this in partnership with the International Finance Corporation, where the money isn't coming from the community themselves, but the mining company is establishing an independent, community-run, community-owned fund as a long-term asset for that community. And so what are the requirements for a board to steward that asset for this generation, but for it to exist in perpetuity as well? We're working with a very, very small group in Zimbabwe, in Western Zimbabwe, in Bulawayo, where really so far the main assets of the Community Foundation have been the board, and the board contributing their own resources. A very sort of humble but extremely committed initiative there. And as we've been all talking about Egypt, I think one of our most interesting partners is a community foundation that was set up a few years ago just outside, just beyond Tahrir Square in the Mahdi community of Cairo, which has been working. The name of the organization is the Waqf al-Mahdi Community Foundation, and the whole notion of trying to revive the concept of Waqf and the endowments and that context. And they've been working very gently in the community, very neighborhood-based. And when Tahrir Square happened and people from the community died at Tahrir Square, this organization that had been there and present in the community was suddenly thrown to a leadership role. But basically the sort of soft skills, the intangibles, the just being there, really kind of threw them into the limelight, into a leadership position that they had really built up by building local relationships with the community. And then the other end of the spectrum are community philanthropies that are 10, 15 years old. So the Kenya Community Development Foundation, for example, has an asset base now of $5 million, has made grants all over the country. And for a country like Kenya, which when it was set up in the late 90s, if you said you would set up a public institution, meaning multi-stakeholder, that Kenyans would give money to, I mean, the idea seemed completely ridiculous, really, because of the levels of corruption that exist. Or in Nepal, the Women's Fund Tewa, which also about 15 years old, has built up a donor base of 3,000 donations from 3,000 individual Nepalis, which is quite an extraordinary feat in an aid-dependent context like Nepal. So that's really where I think I would like to locate our comments. And I'm going to ask Sombat now to speak really on the volunteerism end of this discussion. So please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have some problem about the English language. It's a bad news. But I have the good news. I have the good body language. Okay. It's why I stand up. Okay. I'm from the Mirza Foundation. It's a local NGO in Thailand. I set up this organization 20 years ago with my friend, 5 people. For the beginning, we think only 2 things. We just do something is good and fun. But now, 20 years later, now I'm thinking we should do something is impact and changing. Now we have full-time staff, 70 people, and many volunteers to work with us. The Mirza Foundation work a lot of projects. We cannot say what the issue we do. We do many issues. Example, we work with the Thai people to help them to get the nationality. Have the missing people center. Volunteer in the hospital. Disaster. Many. Anti-trafficking. Donate the second-hand book and second-hand computer to the school. And many projects we have. Okay, today, yes, last year, Thailand had the big problem. It's the Thailand flood, 2011. It's the biggest disaster Thailand had in the history. We have 13 victims, and we lost the money, 47 billion US dollar. It's a lot. This number is from the World Bank. Okay, what is the topic I want to share with you today? Is the community worker relief in disaster. Is the temporary community, because when we thinking about the community at now, it's not mean community in the physical concept. Now it changed already. They have the new community. It's the virtual community. For me, the community is mean the people interesting something together and do something together. This is the community I'm meaning. Okay, last year I have the 10,000 volunteers to work with the Mirza Foundation to help the people in the disaster. It's just only the people who register with me, not include the victim who stay in the community and we join together. We take 3 months to work to help the people. How we find and how the volunteer find us. We start from the online. I think it's very important. We use the Twitter, Facebook. Amazing. I think this happening is same everywhere in the world now, 10 years ago later. In 2004, when the tsunami hit the Pacific, I have the center in the south of Thailand too. I have many volunteers from around the world. It's from the internet. This is a new community. And when we share something in the new media, in the social network, the mass media will catch your message and explore the message to everyone. And volunteers who to join with you, they will mouth to mouth. Yeah, we have a lot. Just one organization. It's not mean us interesting. It mean when have the disaster, everyone want to join, want to do something. Why? Why the people want to join to do something? Because they hurt. They get a lot of information, and they're feeling they hurt. They want to do something for the help the people. Why they hurt? Because the people can relate between victim and us. Can relate. It's a key. If we change the attitude, the people in the normal situation, if the people thinking and can relate between the poor people, it's the same. It's us. Then it's us. If the people thinking like this, attitude is change and they will do something. Okay, open the volunteer job to invite them to join. Okay, what the volunteer do? It should be simple. I have the project about the life jacket. Life jacket. Make the life jacket. 1,000 life jacket from the bottle, plastic bottle. Yeah, simple. I make the raft because we need boat, but we don't have boat. We need boat. I don't have boat. I make raft from the plastic bottle. I make the fly trap. Yeah, okay, fly trap. for the cassette file, because many file, many garbage, many file. How do catch them? Million. Make the track from the plastic bottle. I think this idea should change to share to the Haiti, or it's very simple to do that, to do it. And many activity we do. And big clean up too. Okay. My government have the center to help the people too. But I think the government like the hand. Government is the finger. But the gap is the opportunity of the civil society to fight to do something. Is the I do. Style of the government. Every government, when they do, the style is like the symphony. They have the conductor, like the symphony. But the civil society we do is like jazz music. It's the difference. Principle. One, we should change the attitude of the people, change thinking them to us. Second, find the center. Find the center, how the people can stay together and to work the volunteer. Third, exchange the information and the situation in the crisis, because situation is very quick, change very quick. Fourth, find something, create something is simple and can do, everyone can do that. Fifth, learning under the situation. The challenge. When we thinking about the online community, it's not virtual, it's real. But when online community, they move from the online to offline, it's the temporary community. It's temporary. It's not permanent. My suggestion, if we want to create the community of the philanthropy, make it fun and jazz. Thank you.
Thank you, Sombat. I love the jazz symphony analogy. Sombat introduced it on the first day we met, and I've been in the back of my mind throwing various plenaries, a little bit of jazz there, but maybe a bit more symphony is needed. So we're going to turn to India to hear from Amita, who's with the Charities Aid Foundation there.
Thank you. I'd prefer to sit and speak. My English skills are marginally better than my body language skills. So, just to place philanthropy in context with India. India is a 5,000-year-old civilization. There are 18 officially recognized languages that we speak, 326 that are actually spoken, and many more uncounted dialects. We are 1.3 billion as far as the population count goes, 65% of whom are under the age of 25. We also have a healthy civil society number. So the number of NGOs in India are counted as approximately 3.3 million. So that's a huge number. But everything right from schools to hospitals to everything else is counted as a non-profit. That's the other side of it. On the other hand, we have about 400 of this 1.3 billion people, 400 million that live on less than $1.25 a day, which is the newly defined poverty line that was being spoken about this morning, which leads to challenges of widespread malnutrition. Again, about 50% of India's children are malnutritioned, high maternal mortality, and provision of education itself becomes a challenge. India also rates low on the Human Development Index, which is natural, but high on the corruption index, and again high on the flight of illegal capital. So that's the context so far as India goes. In terms of giving, we have a large, rich tradition of indigenous giving, which spans faith-based practices as well as practices by the merchant communities from which the business classes have sprung up. The real change, however, in the philanthropy landscape has happened over the last couple of decades, when you've seen an exploding middle class and a growing high net worth individual population. In fact, India is supposed to have the highest growth rate as far as HNWI population is concerned. A large number of these have given large grants, have set up their own corporate foundations in the recent past. So when you look at this kind of an economy, you also have a parallel, so what we heard just now. So you have a withdrawal of aid from foreign funding agencies. So when people say, well, you have the fourth largest economy in the world, so the traditional sources of funding are drying up. We also have an interesting phenomena. So while the traditional sources of funding are drying up, there is an attempt to tap into the fundraising space by many, many players. And this includes your international non-profits like Oxfam, Plan, Save the Children. So far, till about 5 to 7 years ago, all these non-profits had program offices and not fundraising offices. So that is the kind of change that is happening in India. So far as community philanthropy goes, there's an interesting history associated with the first community foundation that was set up. So sometime in 1530, the Portuguese owned parts of Bombay, which is the financial capital of India and has been for a long time. When King Charles II got married to a Portuguese princess, he was given Bombay as part of his dowry. And he in turn leased it out to the East India Company on something like £10 a year. Now the governor of East India Company decided that he could not, with limited numbers, he couldn't govern over such a large territory. So he called communities, heads of communities, and said, why don't you set up social foundations, social organizations to manage this community? So you had Hindus, Muslims, Parsis. That's how community was recognized in India, and to a large extent even described today by ethnic and by religious groups rather than geographical thing. So one of those that was set up then was the Bombay Parsi Panchayat. So they were known as panchayats, which is a term in Hindi for self-governance, and it continues to be that term that is used in India so far. So the only one that has survived from those times to this time is the Bombay Parsi Panchayat. And I think one of the reasons why it's survived, I don't know why the others failed. I would love to have been there then to have understood what the mechanisms was. But I think one of the reasons why this one survived was because it ensured that what it was doing was for the community. So they said they would take care of the Parsis from the womb to the grave. It looked at funeral expenses as well as relief for the poor and destitute members. That's how they set it up at that point in time. And it's a small in terms of numbers. It's fairly affluent and fairly close-knit and participative in approach. So I think that is some of the reasons why it survived so long, and in fact has grown, not only survived but grown since that time. Another example, so that was the history. Another example is of a partner that CAF supports. This intervention, however, wasn't supported by CAF. An organization called Seva Mandir, which works in the northern state of Rajasthan in India. And it is an organization that works with the marginalized peasant communities. Rajasthan is is like a desert. So the climate there is a desert. A large number of people in India continue to be involved in farming. So largely peasant community. And again, because this is not an annual kind of occupation, it doesn't occupy you throughout the year, so a large number of them migrate. So the organization Seva Mandir looked at ways of reducing poverty in those areas, involving them in other alternate livelihood opportunities. As part of that, they introduced what was known as the Gram Vikas Kosh, which translated means village development funds. And this was funded by the community. So what they decided was that any project that was being implemented, so whether it was an infrastructure project where the community participated, they would give 30% of their wages to this particular fund. It was governed by locally elected people, and they had complete control over how it would be spent. And again, so the reason for why they managed to do some innovative stuff with that was because of all these decisions. Interestingly, Seva Mandir saw its role as a provider of capacity building. So how do you teach people to, in accounts, in decision making, in leadership development, so that they can take charge of this fund? The challenge, I think, or the reason why it hasn't really scaled up to the extent that it could, is because I think the amount that they started with and continued to have was fairly small. And once the funding is limited to 30% of a particular population, which is not really earning much, the kind of activities that you can do, the result gets impacted. So both positives and challenges and issues that we saw there. The third example is of an interesting college called the Barefoot College. I don't know whether any of you have heard of this. Again, based in Rajasthan, started by urban educated youth who wanted to work with the rural communities. So they went to Rajasthan and started this. The name incidentally comes was coined by something when the Chinese had health workers that were trained in villages to help their communities. So it comes from or is derived from there. So the people who formed the Barefoot College need to have worked or have been trained there. The philosophy of the people who started it was that anyone, or anyone, whether it's poor or marginalized, doesn't matter, anyone who has access to information and access to education can take their own decisions. So the intention right from the beginning was to make sure that the people involved were, people affected were the ones who were involved in the decision making. They lived by 5 values which said that we believe in equality, we believe in decentralization, we believe also that we believe in austerity, we believe in self-reliance. So important principles. The interesting bit was that, okay, my time is up. The interesting bit, I'll take one more minute if that's okay. The interesting bit was that the people who started it in the 60s decided to move away. They had other commitments in the 80s. So in 2 decades, the local people were ready and trained to take over the organization. In 2008, 2009, of the total funding sources, about 6% came from the government, 54% came in from overseas, 40% was community contribution. Super.
Thank you, Amita. So we've heard 2 different examples of really sort of, one a very spontaneous bottom-up outpouring of volunteerism, and I think the importance of empathy, of people feeling something for their fellow citizens and wanting to act. And then the examples from India of really sort of, people, institutions emerging out of a very clear logic to do with community and how communities work. So I guess the question which Mirza is going to help us understand and answer is, so what does it mean for a philanthropic community, for a donor community? Do these things exist in parallel, or how can they be connected? So Mirza, with that small question, I'm going to hand over to you.
Great. Jenny, it's a pleasure to be on this panel. And can I just sort of say that what a wonderful way in which this has been organized, to have real grassroots experiences from countries where we are all aspiring to help. The Aga Khan Development Network has been for a very long time interested in the twin sort of objectives of sustainability and accountability. And we've heard quite a lot of things in this conference about those dual aspirations that we all have. And I think that for us, community philanthropy brings that, both those major objectives of development together. And I'll try and explain how that happens. The first thing is that we have a fundamental belief that ultimately societies are held accountable through their civil societies. Whether it's the media, whether it's women's organizations, whether it's grassroots organizations, whether it's spontaneously established organizations, whether it's volunteers asking questions, that's fundamentally important. The second question, therefore, is then, if that is an important agenda for us, how do you create sustainability of that community action? And when we started to look at those two things at the Aga Khan Development Network, we quickly found that it was about some form of self-help. It was about community philanthropy. It came naturally to the Aga Khan Network because a lot of our work is rooted in volunteerism. Many people say to me, what is the uniqueness? Why are you so successful at the Aga Khan Network? And a fundamental reason is much of our work is done by volunteers, whether it's on the governance boards, whether it's in projects. So this whole notion of the sort of volunteers spontaneously joining is a fundamental belief that we have. So when we then established this sort of collaboration with the Mock Foundation and Rockefeller and Ford and Synagos, I see Shannon here as well, we began to ask ourselves this question about what is it that we can do as philanthropists in the North to support the sustainability of these various actions, the sort of actions that we've heard about today. And so we started to do this consultation process in Asia and in Africa. And I'm glad that we've got two more examples, which I really didn't know about before. And Sombat, your body language is fantastic. I mean, you really explained to me, I don't know about the rest of them, about how people can come together to act together. You also told us about how they can sustain themselves moving forward. And the examples that you give, too, are about self-help. I made a note. I want to understand why the Bombay Parsi Panchayat continued and others fell away. But I think embedded in all those examples, and the examples that you read in our report, if you get a chance to read it, is that traditions of self-help occur. There is no society in the world where if there is a problem that a neighbor has, another neighbor will not rise to help. We saw it in abundance just recently in the Pakistan floods. If you look at the statistics, the overwhelming support for the victims came from the Pakistanis themselves, not from outside. So the first fundamental point for us is identify what's existing already, shine a light on it, and then get international development agencies. I used to work for DFID. I've had lots of collaborations with the World Bank. They seem to sort of overlook something that's existing already. If I ask them about Sombat's organization, I wonder how many people will say they know that organization. And so we have learned from our own experience at the Aga Khan Network that setting up Western-style models of civil society are inherently unsustainable. We have struggled, is it endowments, Is it user fees? Is it consultancy services? How do you sustain the creations of organizations that come from the north? Whether it's Oxfam, Aga Khan, CARE, UNICEF, whoever it is, we're all struggling. And so my hope is that this program that we want to do going forward with a few major foundations from the US who concur with what I'm saying and comes out of our consultation is to first of all shine a light on what's existing and then ask ourselves what can we do to foster many more of such organizations and where are the beacons of hope? How do we support those beacons of hope? Just in this conference, for example, you know, I've come to recognize that Age Concern Help Age has got hundreds of organizations for senior citizens organizations. They are community organizations. They've come together. Let's look at those forms and see how we can support that. And then ask ourselves fundamentally whether supporting those indigenous types of organizations creates a stronger civil society. I've been challenged by my former colleagues at DFID who said to me, well, Mirza, if this thing exists and is doing quite well, why interfere? And that's a very profound question, and I think a lot of us in the West need to ask ourselves that question. Maybe it's left best untouched. And I think that people like Sombat and Amita are going to be very valuable participants going forward in this process to tell us, well, you know, exactly what would work and how do you foster what's already existing. And if you really genuinely feel that not doing anything is the right answer, then sure, we should not do anything. My conviction, though, from the experience that I've had in both Africa and Asia, is that shining a light on them, helping them to learn from each other, creating networks, giving them some ability to use modern technology or new technology, of connecting much more, giving them a way of connecting across different countries, helping them to have forums like this, for goodness sake. Why do we have them and they don't? Those are the sorts of things I think that can actually help to promote them. And most importantly, by shining that light on them, getting the likes of the World Bank and their own national governments to recognize them. India, for all its problems, the government does recognize civil society. The Panchayat movement, for all its problems, is a grassroots movement. But we don't see that in Tanzania. Ujuma, the experience of Ujuma and the socialism there faltered away. But many Tanzanians would say that that was a unique period of time in Tanzania because it created unity. It's not there anymore. Why did it fall away? These are some of the questions that we want to ask of ourselves. We are meeting again a couple of times in the course of this year with the hope that we'll come out with a joint program. And what I would hope that you will do is ask us questions about that process. If you genuinely believe that, you know, our role is to help what exists and to make that grow, then, you know, let's find out what are the best programmatic approaches that we will take going forward. His Highness the Aga Khan in our board meetings has said a very interesting, intriguing idea. He set up the Pakistan Center for Philanthropy very much on the basis of self-help, of asking the Pakistanis themselves the hard question about what are you going to do for your own development. So we are all very much looking forward to this process, and I hope that some of you at least will help us forge some ideas going forward.
Thank you, Mirza. And I would just add to that one of the things I'm particularly struck by in some of the sort of newer community philanthropy institutions that perhaps don't have the history but are coming with that lens is the number of institutions that are being led by individuals who have experience of working in Western NGOs or aid organizations and sort of have seen the limitations of those institutions. And I think it's a very, very striking that there's a tendency to export good leadership into Western development organizations, and that sort of commitment of individuals who are going back to set up their local institutions is very telling. I'd like to open up the floor for some questions and comments. If you could raise your hand, and I think you know the format, say your name, your organization. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Maya Ojmira, and I'm founder and board member of the Global Fund for Children in Washington, D.C., and we invest in local community-based organizations serving vulnerable children and youth throughout the developing world. And one thing I'd like to ask any of you is, doing this work for the last 15, 16 years and really backing local people and their organizations, our support has ranged from $5,000 to $25,000 over 3 to 10 years of our partnership. But one thing is either going up, I think it's going upstream, is the even smaller organizations that are $500, their budgets are $500, $1,000. How are community foundations in those countries thinking about those small micro projects? And has any of those community foundations actually created micro funds which can actually invest very small amounts of money? And I'm just curious about that model. So anybody?
I can speak to that a little bit. I think the first thing I would say is that we've tried in this report, and please take a copy, to distinguish between community philanthropy and community foundations. I'll answer your question, but I just wanted to make the point that community philanthropy has got many different forms, and the community foundation model in North America that we're more used to is only one of those forms. But I think that the point that you're making is a vital one, because the way we can access the smaller organizations with the $5,000 and $10,000 is through intermediaries. And there are, I'm sure Amita can say a bit about in India what happens. But I know in East Africa, we work with organizations like the Madrasa Resource Center on the coast of Kenya that make small grants to smaller communities. And in fact, they're doing something very exciting. They've created what they call a mini endowment. So each of the kindergartens that they work with has got a small endowment through fundraising of their own of $5,000. And so what they've done is that, $5,000 invested in a bank is nothing. But imagine 100 of those coming together, and suddenly you've got $500,000, and you've got some bargaining power to get a better rate of interest. But in Mombasa, what they've done is they bought a building. And so the monies that are generated that go back to the individual community. So I think that small is beautiful, but we also need intermediaries, and it's that balance that we need to try and find.
Hi, Maya. We've not met face to face, but I've interacted strongly. So I would just add to what has been said. Both CAF and other organizations, which includes Give India, work around this. So we don't look at the kind of organizations that you're speaking about, so organizations with 500 or 1,000. But we look at small and medium scale organizations that are not well known outside, so they do not have a brand amongst the general donors. Organizations, again, which need help in terms of fundraising, reaching out to the donor community, talking about their work, but also organizations that fulfill our criteria of programmatic and financial credibility and integrity. So those are some of the criteria that intermediaries like Give and CAF use to support. But this does not, most of the organizations of the scale that you're speaking about will not be able to fulfill some of the norms that have been laid down.
Can you use the microphone?
One of the things I can think about in India is something called Child Rights in You that actually have nodal places where they actually provide really small micro grants and actually help those come to a level where the caps can actually support them with the 5,000.
And I would just say we did a survey of 50 of our grantees in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Central and Eastern Europe a couple of years ago. And these are community foundations and community foundation type institutions that think they're in our, they have some affinity with our sort of interests. And what was very striking about these institutions is how small most of them are. So the actual foundations themselves may have an annual budget of only around $50,000. And the size of, when we get grant applications, if someone talks about their small grants being $25,000, I know immediately that this was set up by someone either in London or New York or Washington, because actually the majority of small grants that our partners disperse are, as small as $50, $100, $1,000.
So have you helped them think about how that can be leveraged by global institutions like the Global Fund for Children? I'm just curious about that. And then I'm
Okay. Well, I think they are where they are, and a large part of the field development process now is identifying those organizations, seeing if they actually subscribe to this group and want to build themselves. And so many of them are still quite small and not there yet. But for example, the Kenya Community Development Foundation, a large part of one of its pieces of work has been around establishing community funds. And really the principle was about building the capacities of communities and the role of communities. When communities put their own money into their fund and decide how it's allocated, that is development and it's empowering. And so these funds are then invested in the KCDF larger endowment fund, which this community would not normally have access to. So there's, there are some examples, but they really are, there's an example there and someone will copy it and adapt it slightly there, but it's still very much a kind of emerging field, but I think the potential is huge. Did you have a question? And does anyone else have a question? Yes. So should we just take two together, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Posner. I'm with an organization called Shining Hope for Communities, founded by a young man in the Kibera slum of Nairobi, Kenya, and really led by him and by his community. Something I've been really interested throughout this conference that I would just love your comments on is it seems like there's a real trend in the larger space of philanthropy and talking about markets and how markets are valued. And I've just been wondering how the communities are included or excluded from these conversations about markets when you're really dealing with the bottom sort of people who don't, the capital just isn't there, and also how I was really struck, Mirza, by what you said about volunteering and how time is often not privileged in the same way as money is in terms of creating these markets. And so I guess my question is sort of how can we have community organizations have a larger voice in this global conversation? Because it really seems like these large I think you've all said that these large development initiatives really can't take hold if the people who they're designed for aren't actually part of the process. And that seems like that affects everything. So I'd love to ask you about that.
Okay, small question.
Yes.
Did you want to pose yours as well?
I'm Sylvia Stefanoni from Alpage International. So I just wanted to, just more a comment and perhaps share very briefly our experience, which is very much building on what they are defined as the People Association in many, many countries. And I think I very much wanted to say that one of the key ingredients is small injection of funding into those organizations, but is the interaction and the facilitating the process across country. I mean, some of the most successful Older People Association have been in Vietnam for us, and the movement has grown very quickly. And we are now at the point, in some cases, is how do we support that the interest in federation and in developing federation. Alpage India, an independent part of the network, is also facing this challenge. So my question to you is, I think we can look at, I think we all can share and learn from what is most successful in terms of supporting these communities, and perhaps linking to the previous question, what is the step then to support them getting a stronger and bigger voice through federation, or we also have adapted other more campaigning approaches, like the Sage Demands Action campaign that we are running.
Thank you. Would any of you like to respond to either or both of those? Amita, would you like?
Okay, just put my...
Or do you want me to turn to somebody else while you think?
think
Do you have
through
something to say?
I mean, I think that both the questions are really very pertinent to the work that we've been doing. It is all about trying to make those connections with people who really matter. And you know, we constantly think about that. What is the way to do it? And I think that the questions are connected in a way because it is about the right types of intermediaries. You know, I mean, I think we can be idealistic and say we'd love to be working with the smallest organizations, but I think in the end we have to work through intermediaries. I think markets are here to stay, and I think that as much as we would probably want some form of cooperative organization of well-being, the massive momentum globally is around markets. And I think what we are trying to do with other initiatives of the Aga Khan network is to say, how do markets work for the poor? How do you make them work? And so we got lots of work on value chains and agriculture processing, right pricing for the poorest farmers, getting more of the poorest farmers within the sort of value chain. Those sorts of things are going to happen. And I think if your question is about, are people going to fall off? And do we need to have safety nets? Then my answer is yes, we do. But you know, it's not an easy thing to tackle. But that's what I would say.
Okay.
So,
did you?
And how do the poorest people? How do you connect to the poorest people in your program?
Connect the poor people.
Connect the poor people in your program. Are there any ideas that you can share with us?
I stay with them in the local. Is when we walk outside my organization, they are poor. It's easier to meet them. Sorry, because I cannot catch the main question. What? Yeah.
We're actually, sorry, we've got a very efficient timekeeper here. Sorry, we have got time. So, sorry, I got distracted by that. That's
Okay,
right.
sorry. If I cannot, if I don't answer your question, maybe it's just new topic. It's okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, it's a little bit. Okay.
Show us something you prepared earlier.
Okay. I think when we do something in the local on my country, we should thinking about something activity is safe, economic, low cost activity. Should thinking about the safe cost is make you do something faster. Yeah, that's first. Yeah. Second is do is fun. Because if you fun, activity is fun, you invite the people to join. Example, 1 year I work with the Hill tribe people. They don't have the nationality. What I do, I make a tour from the north to Bangkok by train. 100 children to the White House, to the government house. Yeah. In the Children's Day. Yeah. Because Children's Day, every year, they open the house to invite the children come. I do that. And I can catch the media, every media, every newspaper, every and television. In the headline, it's tomorrow. The children say need government help to give the Thai nationality for them. It's not look like the rally. It's not like the mob. It's protester. It's not. No. It's make the people fun. And when the media saw the children do like this, it make people laugh. And okay, it's the example. Is why we have many people to join. Yeah.
Do we have any final? We've got 2 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to ask. Oh, yes, Nick, please.
Sorry, I just want to, sorry, not a question, but a comment in as much as we were also involved in the process of the report. For the Mott Foundation, it is all about participation. And philanthropy is a form of participation. And community philanthropy builds local accountability. You mentioned it, Mirza. We heard a lot about it. We heard a lot about in the morning session of beneficiary feedback, of beneficiary supervision. But what about not just thinking of beneficiaries and donors as donors? Everyone is co-participants in the process. People are perhaps the most powerful agents in their own development. And when they actually contribute their time, their money to the process within the community, it becomes that much more powerful. And then outside actors seeing that, respecting that, and sprinkling in some additional knowledge or connections can help enhance that. That's why good intermediaries are very important. We fund and we support the Global Fund for Community Foundations as one prime good example. But they do it in a way that will honor what is already there, that naturally occurring good. So hopefully we'll get some of the big development agencies also to work along those lines too and join on this journey.
Thank you, Nick. We're just approaching the very end of this, and I guess a couple of things. You know, the whole notion of building voice and how institutions that can reach communities that larger donors can't. As soon as you have a relationship with those institutions, small institutions on the ground, if you have 30 grassroots grantees, you have voices of 30 organizations and maybe 300 people, and that sort of pyramid of bringing community voice to a table where it actually has some resonance, I think is very powerful. And I would just say 2 things. One is we've been talking about the sort of the supportive infrastructure that facilitates and doesn't crush what is a naturally occurring phenomenon, I think is extremely important. And the other is you know, we a lot of talk about outcomes and outputs and, you know, measurable indicators and all this, but this work takes time, because if you're talking about building institutions which are owned by people, managed by people, governed by people from that community where local people give, I mean, this is radical stuff, and it's not going to happen overnight. So thank you very much for joining us. I think we have lunch served now. And thank you very much to the panelists.